The rain fell lightly over the cemetery, a soft rhythm tapping against Marcus's umbrella as he made his way down the narrow, muddy path. The smell of wet earth was thick in the air, mixing with the faint scent of freshly cut flowers that dotted the graves around him. As he reached the familiar stone, the name, Evan, carved into its surface, Marcus felt the usual hollow ache in his chest. His son had been gone for almost a year now, and yet the wound felt as fresh as it did the day they lowered him into the ground. Marcus had come to the grave often in the months since Evan's death, seeking some sense of peace, some connection with the boy he had lost. But peace never came, only guilt. Guilt for not knowing his son as well as he should have, for the distance that had grown between them in those final years. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, lost in thought, when he noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye. A figure, a young boy, no more than 17, stood a few feet away, his head bowed in silence before Evan's grave. The sight sent a jolt of confusion and unease through Marcus. Who was this boy? And why was he here, at his son's grave, with flowers of his own? Without thinking, Marcus stepped forward, his feet squishing in the mud. The boy didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, as if he hadn't even noticed Marcus approaching. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from lack of use. The boy flinched slightly, but didn't turn around. "Why are you here?" The boy hesitated for a moment before finally lifting his head, though he still didn't turn to face Marcus. I knew him," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "You knew Evan?" The boy nodded slowly, but offered no more explanation. Marcus's mind raced. How could this stranger, this boy, have known his son? He had never mentioned anyone like this. But then again, Evan hadn't mentioned much all in those last years. Before Marcus could ask anything else, the boy turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist and rain as quickly as he had appeared. Marcus was left standing there, staring after him, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. The rain continued to fall, though now it seemed colder, heavier, as Marcus stood rooted in place. The boy's brief words echoed in his mind, stirring something long buried. I knew him. It was impossible to shake. How had this stranger known Evan? And why had he brought flowers? The next day, Marcus returned to the cemetery, unable to resist the pull of those unanswered questions. The graveyard was as empty as before, the fog still clinging to the ground, wrapping around the tombstones like a shroud. But as Marcus neared Evan's grave, his pulse quickened. There he was, the same boy from yesterday, standing before the grave once more. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. "You again," he called out, his voice firm. The boy stiffened but didn't move. "What's your name? How did you know Evan?" The boy turned slightly, just enough for Marcus to catch a glimpse of his face, a face filled with sorrow and something else, something Marcus couldn't quite place. "Josh," the boy said softly. "My name is Josh. How did you know him?" Marcus pressed, taking a step closer. Josh hesitated, his gaze fixed on the grave. We were friends," he said, his voice shaky, as if each word was a struggle. "But it's complicated." Marcus frowned. Friends. Evan had never mentioned to Josh. He'd hardly mentioned anyone in those final months. But Marcus wasn't ready to give up. "What do you mean, complicated?" Josh shook his head. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered, stepping away from the grave. "I have to go." "Wait." Marcus called after him, but just like before, Josh turned and vanished into the mist before Marcus could get any real answers. Marcus stood there, his frustration growing. Whoever this boy was, he clearly knew something about Evan's life that Marcus didn't. And now, Marcus was more determined than ever to find out the truth. As he left the cemetery, Marcus made a silent vow. He would return, again and again, if he had to. He would confront Josh until he got the answers he was seeking, no matter what. The fog clung to the small town, a constant reminder of the weight that hung over Marcus's mind. The next morning, Marcus found himself walking through the streets, his mind still fixated on Josh and the vague answers he'd given. The boy had seemed distant, but not in a dismissive way. He seemed haunted. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Josh knew more than he was letting on, and that knowledge gnawed at him. His steps led him to the local diner, a place he hadn't visited in months. As Marcus walked through the door, a few familiar faces glanced his way, offering half-hearted waves and sympathetic nods. Everyone in town knew about Evan. Everyone knew the pain Marcus had been carrying since his son's death. But no one knew the full extent of it, not even Marcus himself. He ordered a coffee and sat at the counter, his mind drifting back to the boy in the cemetery, Josh. Marcus had never heard Evan mention anyone by that name. Then again, Evan had grown more and more withdrawn in the years before his death. Marcus had long given up trying to pry into his son's life, feeling the gap between them widen with each passing day. But now it felt like there was something left to uncover. Marcus. A voice snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Karen, the diner's owner. She stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. "It's been a while. How have you been holding up?" Marcus shrugged. "Same as always, I guess." Karen nodded, giving him a sympathetic smile. "I heard you've been visiting the cemetery more often. Must be tough." He sipped his coffee, not really wanting to talk about it. But then a thought struck him. "Karen, do you ever know a kid named Josh? Around 17. He says he was friends with Evan." Karen furrowed her brow, thinking for a moment. Josh. Oh, you mean Josh Harris? Yeah, he used to hang around Evan a bit, didn't he?" Marcus blinked. "He did. Yeah, I remember seeing them together a few times. But then Josh got mixed up in some trouble, or so I heard. Drugs, maybe? Not sure. After that, I didn't see him around much." Marcus's stomach twisted. Drugs. That was the last thing he wanted to hear. Evan never mentioned him. Karen gave him a sad look. "Evan didn't mention much those last few years, did he?" Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar sting of regret. "No, he didn't." As he left the diner, Marcus's mind raced with new questions. Had Evan been involved with drugs too? Was that what Josh had meant when he said things were complicated? And if so, how deep had Evan been in it? The thought sent a chill through Marcus. His son's death had always felt like a tragic accident, but now Marcus wasn't so sure. The next day, Marcus returned to the cemetery. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to achieve, but he knew he had to see Josh again. He needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. As he approached Evan's grave, he wasn't surprised to see Josh standing there once more, staring silently at the tombstone. This time, Marcus didn't wait. He walked straight up to the boy, his voice firm but not unkind. "Josh, we need to talk." Josh turned slowly, his expression guarded. "I don't have anything to say." "You said you were friends with Evan. Why didn't he ever mention you?" Josh shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Marcus's. "It wasn't like that. We weren't close. Not in the way you think." "Then why are you here?" Marcus demanded. "Why do you keep visiting his grave if you weren't close?" Josh hesitated, his jaw clenching as if he was holding back something important. "Because I owe him," he finally muttered. "I owe him more than you could ever understand." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. "Owe him for what?" Josh ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "Look, it's complicated. You wouldn't get it. Try me." For a moment, it looked like Josh was going to bolt again, just like he had the previous days. But something in Marcus's voice, or perhaps the weight of his own guilt, made him stay. He let out a long, shaky breath. We were in trouble, all right. Evan and I. We got mixed up with some people we shouldn't have. People who run things in this town, things that aren't exactly legal." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "What kind of things?" Josh looked away, his voice barely audible. "Drugs, mostly. But not just that. They make people do things, scare them into it. Evan didn't want to be part of it, but he was stuck. We both were." The world around Marcus seemed to tilt, the ground beneath him feeling less steady than before. Evan, involved in drugs? It was a nightmare, one he had never even suspected. "Are you saying Evan was?" "I'm saying it wasn't his fault. Josh cut him off, his voice rising slightly. He tried to get out, but they wouldn't let him. None of us could leave. Marcus felt his hands tremble. What happened to him, Josh? How did he die? Josh swallowed hard, the pain in his eyes clear. I don't know for sure, but I think they killed him. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of Josh's words hanging heavy in the damp air. They killed him. He had come here hoping for some kind of understanding, some clarity on his son's death. But the truth was more terrifying than he had ever imagined. Evan had been mixed up with dangerous people, and now Marcus was left to pick up the pieces of a story he didn't want to believe. Josh, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Who are these people? What do you mean they killed him? Josh's eyes flicked toward the ground, as if unwilling or unable to meet Marcus's gaze. It's not safe to talk about them. They run things in this town, always have. They control everything from behind the scenes, and if you cross them, well, you've seen what happens. Marcus felt a cold wave of dread sweep over him. He had lived in this town his whole life, never suspecting that such darkness lurked beneath its surface. But now, the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that chilled him to the bone. I don't understand, Marcus said, his frustration growing. Why didn't Evan tell me? Why didn't he come to me for help? Josh let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. You really think he could have? These people, they make sure you stay quiet. They know how to keep you in line, how to make you afraid. Marcus's mind raced, replaying the final months of Evan's life over and over. The distance between them, Evan's late nights, and strange behavior, it all seemed so obvious now. And yet, at the time, Marcus had been blind to it. He had assumed it was just the usual teenage rebellion, not something far darker. What about you? Marcus asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Are you still involved with them? Are they coming after you? Josh shook his head, but there was fear in his eyes. I've been keeping my head down, trying not to attract attention. But you asking questions, that's not going to go unnoticed. You should let this go. Let go. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. My son is dead, Josh. I can't just walk away. Josh took a step back, his body tense with anxiety. I know. But if you keep digging, they'll come after you too. These people don't care who gets hurt, as long as their secrets stay buried. For a long moment, the two stood there, rain pattering against the stone grave, neither of them speaking. Marcus's mind was a storm of confusion, grief, and rage. He had already lost his son. He couldn't lose himself too. But how could he possibly walk away from the truth now that he had a glimpse of it? Please, Josh said, his voice softer now. I'm trying to warn you. If you care about your family, you'll stop asking questions. Marcus's jaw clenched as he looked at the boy standing in front of him, a boy who seemed far too young to be carrying such heavy burdens. But Josh was right about one thing. This wasn't just about Evan anymore. This was about something much bigger, something far more dangerous than Marcus had ever realized. I can't promise that, Marcus said finally, his voice steady. I need to know what happened to my son. I need to know who's responsible. Josh sighed, the weight of his own guilt evident in the way his shoulders slumped. Then be careful, he muttered, turning away once again, disappearing into the mist that clung to the cemetery. Marcus stood there alone, staring at the grave, the words echoing in his mind. They killed him. The truth felt like a cold, jagged blade, cutting through everything he thought he knew. And now, there was no turning back. The rest of the day was a blur. Marcus returned home, his mind filled with everything Josh had told him, but the weight of it all felt too heavy to share with anyone, especially with his wife, Elena. She had dealt with Evan's death in her own way, quietly, privately. Marcus had never been good at that. His grief needed to be external, to be solved. Elena's needed to be contained. He spent the night tossing and turning, his mind running through every possible scenario. Who were these people that Josh had mentioned? How had they manipulated his son into something so dangerous? He couldn't shake the feeling that this town, his home, was hiding something far more sinister than he ever imagined. By the time dawn broke, Marcus had made a decision. He wasn't going to sit back and accept what Josh had said. He was going to find out the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. Later that morning, Marcus found himself walking through town, his eyes scanning the familiar streets, now tinged with suspicion. He passed by people he had known for years, shop owners, neighbors, old friends, but now everyone seemed like they could be hiding something. How many of them knew about this underground world that had ensnared his son? Marcus made his way to the one place he thought he might be able to get some answers: the local bar. It wasn't the most reputable place in town, but it was where people went when they didn't want to be found. And if anyone knew about the darker side of the town, it would be someone there. As he stepped inside, the dim light and smell of stale beer hit him like a wave. A few heads turned in his direction, but no one seemed particularly interested in his presence. Marcus scanned the room, his eyes landing on Dave, the bartender. He had known Dave for years, though they weren't exactly close. Still, if there were rumors to be heard, Dave would know them. "Marcus," Dave said with a nod as Marcus approached the bar. "Long time no see. How's it going?" Marcus sat down on the bar stool, glancing around before leaning in slightly. "I need to ask you something," he said, keeping his voice low. Dave raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What's on your mind?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "Did you know Evan was mixed up with something dangerous before he died?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Marcus could see the brief flicker of recognition in Dave's eyes. The bartender leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "What are you talking about?" "I've been hearing things," Marcus continued, trying to stay as calm as possible. "People saying there's an underground group in this town, running things behind the scenes. Evan was involved, wasn't he?" Dave's face darkened, his usual casual demeanor replaced by something much more serious. "Look, Marcus, I don't know what you've heard, but you need to be careful asking questions like that around here. People might take it the wrong way." Marcus's heart raced. "So, it's true." Dave let out a long sigh, glancing around the bar to make sure no one was listening. "There are things that happen in this town that you don't want to get involved with. I liked Evan, okay? He was a good kid, but sometimes good kids get caught up in bad situations. If I were you, I'd let this go." Marcus felt a surge of anger rising within him. "I can't just let go. My son is dead." Dave met his gaze, his eyes filled with both sympathy and warning. "I know, but pushing too hard, it won't bring him back." Marcus left the bar with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Dave's warning played over and over in his mind, but it only fueled his determination to find out more. He couldn't afford to stop now. He had to uncover what had really happened to Evan. His son's life and death deserved the truth, no matter how dangerous that truth might be. Over the next few days, Marcus made discreet inquiries around town. He talked to anyone who might have known Evan or had any connection to the underground world that Josh and Dave had hinted at. Most of them gave him the same response: a cautious shake of the head, a wary glance, and a quick dismissal. It was clear that this wasn't something people were willing to talk about, at least not openly. But Marcus refused to give up. He needed to find someone who would speak up, someone who could give him a concrete lead. His persistence finally paid off when he ran into Ruth, an old friend of the family, at the grocery store. She had always been close with Evan, and Marcus figured she might know more than she was letting on. "Ruth," Marcus said as he approached her, his voice a mix of urgency and exhaustion, "I need to ask you something about Evan." Ruth's face immediately tightened with concern. "Marcus, I don't know if I can help you." "Please," Marcus pressed. "I think Evan was involved with something dangerous before he died. Something big. You were close with him. Did he ever mention anything to you?" Ruth looked down at her hands, clearly torn. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "Evan, he was mixed up in something, yes, but it wasn't his fault. He was trying to protect you and Elena. That's why he didn't tell you." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. "Protect us? From what?" Ruth glanced around the store nervously, lowering her voice even further. "There's a group in town. They control a lot of things: money, power, drugs. Evan got caught up with them because he was trying to help a friend. But once you're in, It's hard to get out. Marcus's pulse quickened. Who runs this group? Ruth hesitated, clearly afraid to say too much. It's not just one person. It's a network. People you wouldn't expect, people with influence. They keep everything hidden, and if you try to expose them, they make sure you disappear. That's why no one talks about it. Marcus's mind raced. So you think he was killed? Ruth's face paled. I don't know for sure, but I do know that he was scared, Marcus. He wanted out, but he didn't know how. And now he's gone. Marcus stood there, his heart heavy with grief and anger. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own world, that he hadn't seen the danger his son was in. But now that he knew, he wasn't going to stop until he uncovered every last piece of this nightmare. Thank you, Ruth, he said quietly. I appreciate you telling me this. Ruth nodded, her expression filled with sympathy and fear. Be careful, Marcus. They don't like people asking questions. The ride home was a blur. Ruth's words echoed in Marcus's head, mixing with the warning he'd received from Josh and Dave. It felt like the entire town was wrapped in shadows, and every step Marcus took led him deeper into the darkness that had claimed his son. He parked the car outside his house and sat there for a long moment, staring at the front door. Inside, Elena would be sitting in the living room, probably reading or knitting, still trapped in her own silent grief. Marcus had tried to shield her from everything he'd been uncovering, but now he wondered if that was the right thing to do. Should he tell her what he had learned, or would that only make things worse? His hands clenched the steering wheel as he thought about how different things had been before Evan's death. The house had been filled with life, with laughter, but those days felt like a distant memory now, as if they belonged to someone else. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he and Elena had truly connected. They had been walking through life as strangers ever since the accident. Finally, Marcus forced himself out of the car and walked to the front door. As he stepped inside, he found Elena exactly where he expected, curled up on the couch, a book in her lap, though she wasn't really reading it. Her eyes were distant, lost in thought. Elena, Marcus said, his voice careful. Can we talk? She looked up at him, surprised. What is it? Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to start. I've been asking around about Evan. There are things I've learned that I didn't know before. Elena frowned, setting the book aside. What kind of things? People are saying that Evan was involved with a group here in town, Marcus said slowly. A dangerous group. I think they might have had something to do with his death. Elena stared at him, her eyes widening in shock. What? That doesn't make any sense. Evan he wasn't involved in anything like that. I didn't think so either, Marcus admitted, sitting down beside her. But I've talked to people who knew him, people who were close to him. They're all telling me the same thing. Evan got mixed up with this group, and when he tried to get out, they wouldn't let him. Elena shook her head, her voice trembling. No, Marcus, that can't be true. Evan was a good boy. He wouldn't have done something like that. I know, Marcus said softly, but it wasn't his choice. He was trying to protect us. That's why he didn't tell us anything. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes, and Marcus could see the raw pain and disbelief in her face. She didn't want to accept it, didn't want to believe that their son had been caught in something so terrible. And part of Marcus didn't want to believe it either. But the more he dug, the clearer it became. I don't understand how we didn't see it, Elena whispered, wiping at her eyes. How could we not have known? I've been asking myself the same thing, Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. But we can't change what happened. All we can do now is try to find out the truth. Elena nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for his. It was the first time in a long while that they had touched each other. I just want to know what really happened to him, Marcus. I want to know why we lost our son. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of her grief mingling with his own. So do I, he said, and I'm going to find out. Days passed, and Marcus found himself consumed by the weight of the truth he had uncovered. He and Elena spoke more frequently now, both of them grappling with the same gnawing question. Why didn't we see this coming? Each conversation brought them closer, but it also deepened the emotional scars left by Evan's death. Marcus couldn't help but feel that he had failed his son, and Elena's quiet grief only reinforced that guilt. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from Josh. The boy's voice was strained, and it was clear he had been wrestling with something since their last encounter. "Marcus," Josh said hesitantly, "I've been thinking. I need to tell you something, but you're not going to like it." "What is it?" Marcus asked, his pulse quickening. "There's a man," Josh began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's the one who runs everything. The drugs, the money, all of it. His name is Tom Warden. If you're serious about finding out what happened to Evan, you'll need to talk to him. But it won't be easy." Marcus gripped the phone tightly. "Where can I find him?" Josh hesitated, clearly torn between fear and a desire to help. "He owns a club on the edge of town. It's where he conducts most of his business. But you need to be careful, Marcus. Warden isn't someone you mess with." Marcus thanked Josh and hung up, his mind already racing with plans. He knew that confronting someone like Tom Warden could be dangerous, potentially deadly. But what choice did he have? The truth about Evan's death had been hidden for too long, and Marcus wasn't about to let fear stop him now. Later that evening, Marcus told Elena about the call. She was understandably terrified, her face paling as he explained who Warden was and what Josh had told him. "Marcus, you can't go to this man," Elena pleaded, her voice shaking. "If he's as dangerous as Josh says, what if something happens to you?" "I have to," Marcus said softly, his resolve unwavering. "I can't let this go. Not now." "But what if he hurts you? What if you don't come back?" Elena's voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his heart aching at the sight of her fear. "I'll be careful, I promise. But I need to do this for Evan, for us." Elena looked away, wiping her eyes. She didn't say anything more, but Marcus could feel the tension between them. He knew that she was scared of losing him too. But there was no turning back now. He had to see this through. The night was thick with tension as Marcus drove to the outskirts of town. The fog clung to the winding road, making visibility difficult, but Marcus's focus was fixed on the destination ahead. The club, aptly named the Blackstone, loomed in the distance, its neon sign flickering in the mist. It was a place Marcus had always avoided, known for its rough clientele and its connection to the underworld. He parked his car in the shadows, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he approached the entrance. The bouncer at the door gave him a suspicious glance, but stepped aside without a word when Marcus slipped him a few bills. Inside, the club was dimly lit, filled with the thrum of bass-heavy music and the murmurs of shady deals being made in the corners. Marcus moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning for any sign of Tom Warden. It didn't take long before he spotted him, a large, intimidating figure sitting at a booth in the back, surrounded by men who looked more like bodyguards than drinking companions. Warden had a certain air about him, the kind that made it clear he was in control, the kind that made people fear him. With his heart hammering in his chest, Marcus approached the booth, forcing himself to remain calm. He was about to step into the lion's den, and he knew he had to be smart about it. "Tom Warden?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. Warden glanced up from his drink, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Marcus. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus," he said. "I'm Evan's father." Warden leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. "Evan? Huh, yes. I remember him. Good kid, but he got mixed up in things he shouldn't have." Marcus's blood boiled at the casual way Warden spoke about his son, as if Evan's life had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "I'm here to ask you what really happened to him," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. Warden chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "You want answers, huh? Well, I can tell you this. Your son wasn't innocent. He knew the risks. He made his choices." "What choices?" Marcus pressed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Did you have something to do with his death?" Warden's eyes gleamed with amusement, but there was an edge of menace in his voice when he spoke. "I didn't kill your son, if that's what you're asking. But Evan, he got himself into a situation he couldn't handle. He tried to back out of a deal, and that's when things went south." Marcus's heart clenched. "A deal? What kind of deal?" "The kind of deal you don't walk away from," Warden said coolly. "But your son, he thought he could, and that's when he got in over his head." Marcus felt the world tilt around him, the weight of Warden's words crashing down on him. His son had been trying to escape, trying to get out of something dangerous, but he hadn't been able to. And now, he was dead. What happened to him? Marcus asked again, his voice strained. "Tell me the truth." Warden sighed, leaning forward with a predatory glint in his eyes. "The truth. Your son made a mistake, and he paid the price. That's all there is to it. And now, you should walk away before you make the same mistake." Marcus stared at the man in front of him, rage and grief swirling inside him like a storm. He wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but he knew pushing any further could be dangerous. Warden's words were a clear warning, one that Marcus couldn't afford to ignore. Without another word, Marcus turned and left the club, his mind spinning with the implications of what he had just learned. Evan had been trying to escape, and it had cost him his life. And now, Marcus was left with the bitter truth that he had come so close to saving his son, only to realize it far too late. The drive home from the Blackstone was a blur of headlights and raindrops streaking across the windshield. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Tom Warden's words played over and over in his head like a broken record, the bitter truth sinking deeper into his heart. Evan had tried to escape, and it had cost him his life. Warden may not have pulled the trigger, but Marcus knew deep down that this man was responsible for his son's death. Now he had to make a choice, turn away and protect himself and Elena, or keep pushing no matter the danger. When he arrived home, Elena was waiting for him. The moment she saw his face, she knew something had happened. She rose from the couch, her eyes wide with concern. "Marcus, what did you find out?" He hesitated for a moment, still grappling with the weight of the decision he had to make. But he couldn't lie to her. "Not now. I met Warden," he said, his voice low. He didn't say it outright, but he made it clear. Evan got mixed up in a deal he couldn't get out of, and when he tried to walk away, they killed him. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be true." "I didn't want to believe it either," Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. But Warden made it clear. Evan was trying to protect us, to get out of something dangerous. And when he couldn't, they took his life. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room was filled with the sound of rain tapping against the windows, the weight of their shared grief hanging heavy in the air. Elena sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands as she sobbed quietly. Marcus sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her as they both let the pain wash over them. "I don't know what to do," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to make them pay. I want to get justice for Evan, but I don't know how." Elena looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "What can we do? We can't go up against men like Warden. It's too dangerous." "I know," Marcus said, his heart aching with the weight of the truth. "But I can't just walk away. Not after everything I've learned." Elena shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you too." Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on finding out what had happened to Evan, so determined to uncover the truth, that he hadn't thought about what it would cost him or Elena. If he kept pushing, if he went after Warden, there was a very real chance that he wouldn't come back. "I'll be careful," Marcus said softly. "I promise." Elena didn't respond. She simply leaned into him, her tears soaking into his shirt as they held each other, both of them weighed down by the unbearable burden of their loss. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Marcus tried to keep a low profile, but the weight of what he had learned hung over him like a storm cloud. He knew that going after Warden directly would be reckless, but he couldn't shake the need for justice, for revenge. Every time he thought about Evan's last days, Trapped in a web of lies and danger, it fueled the fire burning inside him. But with every passing hour, he could feel the distance between him and Elena growing wider. She was terrified that his obsession would lead to his death, just like it had for their son. One evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee, his phone buzzed on the countertop. He picked up, seeing Josh's name flash across the screen. Marcus hadn't heard from Josh since their last conversation about Warden, but now, seeing his name, Marcus felt a strange mix of hope and fear. He answered the call. "Marcus." Josh's voice was tense, urgent. "We need to talk. I've been hearing things. People are saying you went to Warden." "I did," Marcus replied. "He gave me just enough to know that he had a hand in Evan's death. But he's smart. He didn't say too much." Josh's sigh was heavy, filled with the weight of someone who had lived too many lives for someone his age. "You need to stop, Marcus. You've already stirred the pot. People are talking, and it won't be long before Warden or his men come after you. You need to let this go." "I can't," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Warden is responsible for my son's death. I can't just walk away." "I know," Josh replied, his voice laced with sympathy. "But if you keep pushing, you'll end up like Evan. Warden won't hesitate to get rid of you if he thinks you're a threat." Marcus was silent for a moment, the weight of Josh's words sinking in. He knew that Josh was right. He was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than he could ever have imagined. But how could he stop now? How could he let the man responsible for his son's death walk free? "Listen," Josh continued, his voice softer now. "I know someone who might be able to help. He used to work for Warden, but he got out, barely. If anyone knows how to bring him down, it's this guy. But it's risky." Marcus's heart raced. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. "Who is he? Where can I find him?" "I'll send you the address," Josh said. "But Marcus, be careful. This guy isn't someone you mess with lightly. He'll help you, but only if he thinks you can handle it." Marcus thanked him and hung up, his mind racing with the possibilities. This was it, his chance to finally take Warden down and get justice for Evan. But as he looked around the quiet house, his gaze landing on the framed photos of his family that lined the walls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something he wasn't prepared for. And the price of his obsession might be more than he could bear. The following day, Marcus sat in his car, parked outside the address Josh had given him. It was an old warehouse, abandoned by the look of it, situated on the edge of town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the building's rusted exterior. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. Inside was a man who might hold the key to taking down Tom Warden and getting justice for Evan. But Josh had been clear. This man, Nick, was dangerous, and he wouldn't help unless he believed Marcus could handle it. With a final glance at his phone, Marcus stepped out of the car and made his way toward the warehouse. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the dim light from the setting sun barely reached the corners of the vast room. "Marcus, right?" The voice startled him. He turned quickly to see a man leaning against one of the metal support beams, his arms crossed. Nick was tall, muscular, and had the look of someone who had seen too much. His sharp eyes assessed Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Yeah," Marcus replied, stepping forward. "I'm Marcus. Josh said you might be able to help me." Nick smirked, pushing off the beam and walking toward him. "Help you?" "That depends. Josh said you're looking to take down Warden. Is that right?" Marcus nodded, his pulse quickening. "Warden was responsible for my son's death. I need to bring him down." Nick raised an eyebrow. "And you think you can do that? You think you can go up against someone like Warden and come out on top?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I don't have a choice. He took everything from me. I can't just walk away." For a moment, Nick was silent, his eyes scanning Marcus's face, searching for something. "I used to work for Warden," he said finally. "I know how he operates. He's smart, ruthless, and always 3 steps ahead. If you're going to go after him, you need more than just anger. You need a plan." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. That's why I'm here. I need your help. Nick let out a bitter laugh. Help? You really don't know what you're asking for, do you? Going after Warden means stepping into a world you're not prepared for. But you're lucky. I've been planning to take him down for a long time. I just needed someone who was willing to take the risk. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. I'm willing. Nick nodded slowly. All right then, here's what we're going to do. For the next hour, Nick laid out a plan. A plan that involved careful timing, precise execution, and a lot of risk. They would gather evidence, expose Warden's operation, and take him down in one swift move. But it wouldn't be easy. Warden had eyes and ears everywhere, and one wrong move could cost them everything. As Nick talked, Marcus felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. He knew this was dangerous, but it was the only way to get justice for Evan, to finally bring the truth to light. By the time they were finished, Marcus had a clear sense of what needed to be done. Nick handed him a small USB drive, his expression serious. This has everything you need to expose Warden. Transactions, communications, records of his deals. But be careful. Once you use this, there's no going back. Warden will know you're coming for him. Marcus took the drive, feeling its weight in his hand. It was small, insignificant looking, but he knew the power it held. It was his weapon, his chance to make Warden pay. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. Nick gave him a sharp nod. Just don't get yourself killed. The next morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at the USB drive. It felt like the calm before a storm, the silence of the house pressing down on him. Elena had gone out to run errands, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He had everything he needed to bring down Warden, but the fear of what would come next weighed heavily on his mind. He knew he couldn't do this alone. As much as he had tried to keep her in the dark, he had to tell Elena the truth. She needed to know what was about to happen, what they were both about to risk. With a deep breath, Marcus picked up his phone and called her. Elena, can you come home? I need to talk to you, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside him. An hour later, Elena walked through the door, her eyes filled with concern. Marcus, what's going on? He gestured for her to sit down, his heart heavy with the weight of the conversation they were about to have. I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I've thought this through. Elena sat down slowly, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is it? Marcus pulled out the USB drive, setting it on the table between them. This is it, he said quietly. Everything I need to take Warden down. I met with someone last night, someone who used to work for him. He gave me this. It's proof of everything. Elena stared at the drive, her face a mix of shock and fear. Marcus, what are you saying? What are you going to do? I'm going to expose him, Marcus replied, his voice firm. I'm going to the police, to the press, anyone who will listen. I'm going to make sure Warden pays for what he did to Evan. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus, no, you can't. It's too dangerous. Warden, he'll come after you. He'll come after us. I know, Marcus said, his voice soft, but I can't let him get away with this. He's been doing this for too long, ruining lives, taking everything from people. I won't let him keep doing it, and I won't let him take more from us. Elena shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't lose you, Marcus. I can't. Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You won't. I promise. I'll be careful, but I have to do this, Elena. For Evan. For us. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Elena nodded, her voice trembling. Okay, but we do this together. Marcus felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Together. The rain fell steadily, a soft and constant rhythm against the windows. It was the kind of rain that had once felt oppressive to Marcus, reminding him of the weight of his grief. But today, the rain felt different, cleansing almost, as if it were washing away the remnants of the past, preparing him for what was to come. Marcus sat in his car, parked in front of the police station, gripping the small USB drive tightly in his hand. Elena was beside him, her presence a quiet, steady force. They hadn't spoken much on the drive here. There wasn't much left to say. Every word had been said in the hours before, in the dark moments of fear and doubt. Now, all that remained was the action itself. "You ready?" Elena asked, her voice soft but determined. She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. Marcus nodded, his hand tightening around the USB drive. "Yeah," he said, though his voice was thick with the gravity of what they were about to do. "It's time." They stepped out of the car into the rain, the cold drops immediately soaking through their clothes. The world around them felt quiet, almost as if the town itself was holding its breath. Every step toward the police station felt heavy, but each one also felt like it brought Marcus closer to the justice he had been seeking. Justice for Evan, and for the boy he had never fully understood. Inside the station, the harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, a sharp contrast to the soft rain outside. The front desk officer looked up as Marcus and Elena approached, her expression neutral but curious. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice formal. "I need to speak to someone about this," Marcus said, holding up the USB drive. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "It contains evidence of criminal activity. Serious criminal activity. Tom Warden." The officer's expression changed immediately. She straightened in her seat, her eyes narrowing. "Tom Warden," she repeated, as if the name itself carried weight. She signaled to another officer behind the desk and handed the drive to him. "Wait here," she said to Marcus and Elena, her tone now more urgent. They stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, the hum of the station filling the quiet moments. Marcus could feel the tension rising inside him. Everything hinged on this moment. All the pain, the questions, the fear. It all led to this. He glanced at Elena, and she offered a small, reassuring smile, squeezing his hand. She had been his anchor through the storm, and now they were standing on the edge of what felt like the final battle. A few minutes later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a stern expression walked toward them. His eyes were sharp, taking in both Marcus and Elena with a discerning look. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Grayson and motioned for them to follow him into a back office. Once inside, the door closed softly behind them, and Grayson sat at his desk. The USB drive rested in front of him like a fragile, powerful object. "I've been briefed on what you've brought in," he began, his voice calm but serious. "Tom Warden is not a name we hear lightly around here." Marcus swallowed, the weight of the situation settling on him. "He's responsible for my son's death," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. "Evan, he got caught up in Warden's operation. I have proof, everything you need to take him down. It's all on that drive." Grayson picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his hands before meeting Marcus's gaze. "If what you're saying is true, this could blow the lid off something much bigger than we've been able to touch. But you understand the risks involved here, right? Warden doesn't go down easily." "I understand," Marcus said, his heart pounding, "but I can't let him keep doing this. Not after what he did to my son." Grayson nodded slowly, his eyes softening with understanding. "You're a brave man, Mr. Marcus. Most people wouldn't dare to come forward like this, but we'll handle it from here." He paused for a moment, then added, "You and your wife should be careful. Once we move on this, Warden will know someone's behind it. We'll provide protection, but you need to stay under the radar until we can bring him in." The gravity of Grayson's words hit Marcus like a punch. He had expected danger. He had known it from the moment he decided to confront Warden, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. He glanced at Elena, her face pale but resolute. They were in this together, but the stakes had never felt higher. "We understand," Marcus said after a long pause. "Just make sure justice is served. For Evan." Grayson nodded once more, his face hardening with resolve. "We'll do everything we can." As Marcus and Elena walked out of the station and back into the rain, the weight that had sat on his chest for so long felt lighter. The evidence was now in the hands of the police. It was out of his control, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The drive home was quiet, the rain still falling steadily, but now it felt like a part of the rhythm of life rather than a backdrop for grief. Elena reached over and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. They didn't need to say anything. The worst of the storm had passed, and now all they could do was wait for what came next. When they arrived home, the house felt different, warmer, somehow lighter. Marcus sat down in the living room, staring at the pictures of Evan on the mantel. His heart still ached, the loss of his son a wound that would never fully heal. But there was peace in knowing that, finally, the truth was coming to light. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Weeks later, the news broke. Tom Warden had been arrested, his empire crumbling beneath the weight of the evidence Marcus had provided. The town buzzed with shock. Whispers of the power Warden had once held now reduced to tales of downfall and justice. Marcus and Elena watched the coverage from their living room, a quiet sense of satisfaction between them. It wasn't an easy road, and the scars of what they had been through remained, but there was healing in the rain, the kind that washed away the pain, bit by bit, and allowed for the possibility of something new. In the quiet moments, Marcus would visit Evan's grave, the place where this journey had begun. The rain would often fall, just like it had on that first day when he saw Josh standing there. But now, the rain didn't feel like a burden. It felt like closure. And as Marcus stood by his son's grave, he knew that he had done right by Evan. He had found justice. And, in a way, he had found peace. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps us reach more people and continue sharing impactful stories like this one. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of this story had the most impact on you? Was it the mystery, the emotional journey, or the final confrontation? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback means a lot. Also, I'm always looking for new story ideas, so feel free to suggest any stories or themes you'd like to see covered on the channel in the future. I'm excited to create more content you'll love, so don't hesitate to share your ideas. Thanks again for being a part of this journey. See you in the next one.